300 million people. That is the official number, the one the World Health Organization publishes, the one that appears in reports and headlines and gets cited in conferences where people in suits discuss the global mental health crisis with the careful distance of people who are not inside it. But researchers know and rarely say out loud that 300 million is not the real number. 300 million is the number of people who already hit the bottom, who already collapsed, who already could not pretend anymore. The ones who made it into the system, who got the diagnosis, who ended up in a doctor's office or a hospital or a crisis line and finally became visible to the data. The others, the ones still standing, the ones still showing up, the ones still performing the role of a person who is fine, they are not in that number, and they are everywhere. Depression is not the moment you break, it is everything that happened before that, in silence, inside a life that looked completely functional from the outside, inside a body that kept going to work and answering messages and laughing at the right moments, while something essential was quietly exiting the room. And here is the number nobody tells you. According to the WHO itself, less than 50% of severe depression cases receive any kind of treatment, not only because of lack of access, but because the majority of people living with it do not recognize themselves as sick. They recognize themselves as weak, lazy, dramatic, not strong enough for a world that has decided that struggling is a personal failure, rather than a rational response to conditions that were never designed for human beings to thrive in. The world made sure it would be that way, because a human being who understands what is making them sick looks for a way out, and a human being who looks for a way out starts asking questions, and questions are too expensive for a system that profits from exhaustion. Since 1990, depression cases have increased by more than 50% globally. In the same period, antidepressant consumption in developed countries tripled, but well-being did not rise. Demanded productivity did. Loneliness did. The feeling that life should mean more than it means. That one has never been more universal. The philosopher and psychiatrist Carl Jaspers wrote that the deepest psychic suffering is the kind the patient cannot articulate. Not because they are incapable, but because nobody ever gave them the language for it. We grow up learning to name what we see, never what we feel beneath what we show. And that is exactly where depression takes root, not in visible pain, in the emptiness that hides behind what passes for normal. This video will not offer you easy comfort. It will offer you something rarer, clarity about where this comes from, what sustains it, and what, with honesty and precision, can actually be done about it. Because the opposite of depression is not happiness, it is presence. And you cannot be present in a life that never stopped to ask what you actually need. The word trauma has been stolen. Everyone associates it with wars, accidents, violence with evidence, with blood, with witnesses, as if pain is only real when someone can point to it and say, this is where it broke. But research arrived at a conclusion that is profoundly uncomfortable. The wounds that destroy the most are exactly the ones nobody can see, not even the person carrying them. Gabor Maté is a Canadian physician who spent decades treating patients with severe depression and addiction. He said something that completely changes what we understand about suffering. Trauma is not what happened to you, it is what happened inside you as a result of what happened. Not the event, what was left behind, what was never named, what never had a witness. This means a childhood without poverty, without violence, without visible tragedy can still break someone from the inside. The boy who cried and was told, "Stop being dramatic"? The girl who felt afraid and learned that feeling afraid was wrong? The child who tried to show something they created, something they felt, something they discovered, and found distraction, rush, indifference. None of those moments appear in any record, but all of them teach the nervous system a silent and lasting lesson. It is not safe to be who you are, and the nervous system learns fast and never forgets. Research conducted by the American CDC with more than 17,000 people found that children exposed to 4 or more adverse childhood experiences have a 460% higher chance of developing depression in adult life. The number that shocks is not the statistic itself, it is what was behind those experiences. In the majority of cases, it was not physical violence, it was emotional neglect, absence, the silence where presence should have been. The child who learned to suppress what they feel did not become strong, they became disconnected. And disconnection sustained for years is the exact soil where depression germinates, quiet, invisible, disguised as personality. The cruel paradox is this. The person who grew up that way rarely recognizes what they lived as trauma, because it was not an event, it was a climate. It was the air breathed every day, the embrace that never came, the question that was never asked, and what was never named could never be healed. As Maté summarizes, most of the illnesses we treat are adaptations to environments that did not support who the individual actually was. Not weakness, it was never weakness. It was the only exit a child found, and the adult still carries it without knowing they can already let it go. In Japan, they created a word for something that should not need a name: karoshi, deaf from overwork. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration, people who literally stopped functioning, heart, brain, body, because they worked beyond the human limit. And the most disturbing thing is not that it happens, it is that for decades it happened in silence, with pride, because the culture called it dedication. This is not a Japanese problem, it is a mirror. The philosopher and cultural critic Mark Fisher spent years studying what he called capitalist realism, the idea that we live in a system where it has become literally easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Not because the system is good, but because it colonized something much deeper than the economy. It colonized the way people see themselves. Fisher wrote that when a system achieves this, when it becomes indistinguishable from reality itself, any suffering it produces starts to look like the fault of the person's suffering. And that is exactly what happens with depression today. The worker who cannot take it anymore is not seen as someone in a sick environment. They are seen as someone too weak for the environment. The person who collapses does not receive an analysis of the conditions that brought them there. They receive an individual diagnosis, a prescription, and the veiled suggestion that they need to adapt better. The WHO recognized burnout as an occupational phenomenon in 2019, not as personal weakness, as a consequence of chronically dysfunctional work environments. But the system already had the answer ready. Meditation apps, resilience courses, emotional balance workshops. The problem is collective and structural and manufactured. The solution offered is always individual. Fisher called this the privatization of stress. The suffering that is born from social conditions is handed back to the individual as personal responsibility, and the already exhausted individual accepts, because questioning the system requires energy, and the energy was all consumed by the system. When a person can no longer feel pleasure, cannot find motivation, wakes up with no reason to get up, the clinical diagnosis says it is a dysfunction. But Fisher argued that in many cases it is a rational response to a life that has been emptied of real meaning, a life built entirely around producing and consuming and appearing productive enough to deserve rest. The problem is not that people are weak, the problem is that they spent years resigning from themselves before resigning from their jobs, giving up dreams, time, relationships, questions that bothered them, fitting themselves into a model of existence that was never designed for them to fit into. And when the body finally refuses, when the mind switches off, they call it illness, what was for years a form of survival. Mark Fisher did not live to see the world recognize what he described. In 2017, he took his own life after decades fighting the depression he himself theorized with such precision. That is the most painful and most honest irony this video could bring. The man who mapped collective sickness did not escape it. And that is not defeat. It is the most compelling proof that we are talking about something real, structural, urgent, something that does not resolve itself with willpower. In 2023, the Surgeon General of the United States, the highest public health authority in the country, issued an official alert classifying loneliness as an epidemic. Not a trend, not a concern, an epidemic, with the same health risks as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. In a world where we are never more connected, this should be impossible. And yet, the psychologist Jonathan Haidt spent years tracking the exact moment when adolescent mental health began to collapse. The inflection point is precise: 2012, the year the smartphone became ubiquitous, the year social media migrated from computer to pocket, to bed, to every second of silence that used to exist. Between 2012 and 2019, severe depression cases among American teenage girls increased by 166%, Among boys, 103%. This is not a weak correlation, it is one of the most robust associations psychology has ever documented. But the problem is not technology itself, it's what it replaced. Johan Hari is a journalist who investigated the real causes of depression around the world. He wrote something that changes the entire conversation. The opposite of depression is not happiness, it is connection. And real connection, the kind that sustains, that regulates the nervous system, that tells the brain you are not alone in the world, that does not happen on a screen. It never did. The neuroscience explains why with elegant cruelty. Superficial interactions, likes, quick comments, conversations without depth activate the same brain circuits as social rejection. The brain does not register the quantity of contact, it registers the quality of presence. And real presence in recent years has become a scarce resource. What social media did was not just occupy time, it restructured what people understand by relationship. An entire generation grew up learning that connection is measured in numbers, that personal value is confirmed by public approval, that silence, that fertile silence where identity forms, is something to be filled immediately with stimulation. And when that stimulation stops, the emptiness that appears is not small, it's enormous, because it was never really filled. Hari went further in his investigation. He visited communities around the world where depression rates were surprisingly low. The pattern was always the same. They were not wealthy places, they were not places without problems, they were places where people still genuinely needed each other, where there was real interdependence, not performative. What modernity sold as evolution, total independence, self-sufficiency, a life curated on a screen, is in practice the most sophisticated isolation humanity has ever built. And isolation the human brain interprets as danger. It always has. We were social animals long before we were individuals. The depression that grows here is not primarily chemical, it's ecological. It's the result of a human being living in an environment radically incompatible with what they need to actually survive. And the most dangerous silence is not the silence of someone alone in a room, it's the silence of someone surrounded by people who still feels that nobody, absolutely nobody, truly knows them. In a clinic in Boston, a group of doctors spent decades intrigued by the same pattern. Patients with real, debilitating, documented physical pain, but no organic cause found. Normal tests, impossible diagnosis, undeniable suffering. Conventional medicine had an answer for this. It called it psychosomatic and used the word as if it were a polite way of saying the pain was not real, that it was in the head. Bessel Kolk is a psychiatrist who spent more than 40 years studying trauma. He came with a correction that changed medicine. The pain was absolutely real. The address was wrong. The doctors were looking for the cause in the organ. The cause was in the history. The title of his most important book says everything. The body keeps the score. The body does not forget what the mind learned to ignore. Every unprocessed emotional experience leaves a physiological trace. The autonomic nervous system, the HPA axis, cortisol levels, all of it is measurably altered by traumas that were never processed. And when those records accumulate over years, the body begins to speak the only language that cannot be silenced: physical pain. Kolk wrote that trauma is not just an event that happened in the past, it is the mark left on the brain, the mind, and the body, and that mark does not wait for permission to manifest. Fibromyalgia is one of the most documented and most ignored examples of this reality. Studies published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress show that between 45 and 65% of fibromyalgia patients have a history of significant untreated emotional trauma. The pain they feel in their muscles, their joints, their entire body is not invention. It is the embodied archive of everything that could never be said. And it is not only fibromyalgia. The person who has slept badly for years and learned to call it personality, always been this way, is in the majority of cases carrying a nervous system that never left the state of alert. Chronically elevated cortisol does not only prevent deep sleep, it literally inflames. Research in neuroimmunology shows that chronic systemic inflammation is directly associated with severe depression, not as a consequence, but as a mechanism. Inflammation alters the production of serotonin and dopamine and the brain's capacity to regulate mood. The body does not get sick by accident. It gets sick by accumulation. And what accumulates? Everything that was swallowed. The anger that could not be expressed, the crying that was cut short, the fear that had to become strength because there was no space for weakness. Van der Kolk describes patients who spent decades unable to identify a single emotion, not because they did not feel, but because their nervous system learned very early that feeling was too dangerous. He calls this alexithymia, the inability to name what you feel, and it is far more common than any statistic can capture, because the person who has it does not know they have it. They simply do not understand why the body will not stop hurting. The medicine that treats symptoms without touching the origin is not healing. It is postponing the collapse. And when the collapse comes, it comes with everything, because the body waited, stored, carried until it could not anymore. Viktor Frankl survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, lost his wife, his mother, his brother, was reduced to a number tattooed on his arm, and in the middle of all of that, in the absolute bottom of what a human being can endure, he arrived at a conclusion that modern psychology is still trying to fully absorb. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Frankl was not talking about optimism. He was talking about something much older and much more solid: meaning. And the absence of meaning for him was not a spiritual problem. It was a clinical emergency. After everything built throughout this video, the trauma that does not bleed, the system that consumes and blames, the loneliness manufactured by hyperconnectivity, the body storing what the mind rejects, it would be dishonest to end with a tidy list of solutions. Depression does not have one cause. It has layers, and each layer requires a different response. Precise, honest. The first response is the simplest and hardest. Name it. The researcher Brené Brown demonstrated with data that naming an emotion reduces its intensity in a measurable way because it activates the prefrontal cortex and regulates the amygdala. The brain literally calms when it finds language for what it feels. This is not talk therapy, it is neurobiology, and it starts alone, right now, with one honest question: what am I actually feeling? The second response is the one the modern world most resists: real reconnection. Not social media, not organized superficiality. Johann Hari, who traveled the world studying communities with low depression rates, identified a universal pattern: people who genuinely need each other. Interdependence, physical presence, conversations that cost something emotionally. Science calls this co-regulation. The nervous systems of 2 human beings in real contact literally synchronize and calm each other. No algorithm replicates that. The third response lives in the body because it was in the body that everything was stored. Studies published in JAMA Psychiatry show that regular physical exercise has comparable efficacy to antidepressants in cases of moderate depression. Not because the body is more important than the mind, but because there is no separation between the two. Movement is not compensation, it is language, the body processing what words have not yet been able to reach. The fourth response is the deepest: meaning constructed, not found. Frankl was clear: meaning does not appear, it is actively constructed, even in the middle of pain, even when everything seems pointless. The therapy based on his approach, logotherapy, doesn't ask how you feel, it asks what for. And that question, when answered with honesty, reorganizes everything. The fifth response is the one most people need to hear and fewest people say. Seeking professional help is not the last resort, it is the first act of respect for yourself. Cognitive behavioral therapy has one of the highest documented efficacy rates in all of clinical psychology. EMDR revolutionized trauma treatment. Psychiatry, when used with precision and not as a substitute for everything else, saves lives. These are not opinions, they are decades of research. And yet, and this is the last point, the most important one, none of this works while the person believes the problem is them. The problem was never you. It was what happened inside you without anyone knowing how to help. It was the system that profited from your exhaustion. It was the loneliness disguised as independence. It was the body carrying what life never allowed to be put down. Frankl also wrote this: When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But changing yourself is not erasing who you are, it is finally becoming whole. You will not get better because someone told you that you will. You will get better because you will start asking questions you never dared to ask, because you will stop calling personality what is untreated pain, because you will understand that the emptiness you feel is not a factory defect, it is hunger. Hunger for presence, for meaning, for a life that is genuinely yours. And that hunger, that one has an answer. Before you go, I want to ask you something directly, not rhetorically, actually. What did you call it before you watched this video? What word were you using for the thing you have been carrying? Lazy? Ungrateful? Too sensitive? Not strong enough? Write it in the comments, 1 word or 10, because the person who needs to read your comment is already down there waiting for it. And naming it out loud, even in a comment section, is the first time some people have ever done it. Do not underestimate what that does. There is something I need to tell you before this ends. Everything you just heard, the research on childhood trauma, the ACE study, Mark Fisher's work on how the system profits from your collapse, Bessel van der Kolk on the body storing what the mind rejects, Johann Hari on the real causes of depression that nobody in power wants to become mainstream knowledge. This is documented, verified, peer-reviewed, published in the most respected journals in the world, and it is not on the front page of any newspaper. It is not in any government health campaign. It is not what the pharmaceutical industry leads with when it talks about mental health. Because a person who understands that their depression is a rational response to structural conditions does not stay in the system quietly. They start asking who built the system and why, and who benefits from them staying sick. That conversation cannot happen on a platform that needs you comfortable enough to keep watching ads. It happens somewhere else, where the algorithm cannot reach, where the debates go into the territory this format cannot follow, where the videos that were never going to survive here live permanently, where the written pieces say directly what this format has to say sideways. The people already there are not looking for comfort. They are looking for the version of the truth that the comfortable version leaves out. If that's you, the link is in the description. No sales pitch, no pressure. Either you're ready for that room or you're not. But if you are, it's there. And what happens inside it is nothing like what happens anywhere else.